I'd like to introduce Sam. And Sam Fitzpatrick is the education coordinator for the Historical Museum of Bay County. So you've probably seen him there. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Central Michigan and has previously worked on historical documentaries with Delta College Public Broadcasting, which is a good thing. I retired from there, so I'm excited about that one. And he's now focused on the city of Flint and volunteered with the Castle Museum of Saginaw County History. And Sam is a contributing writer to University of Michigan's Flint's WPA Guidebook Pilot Program for Mideast Michigan, with a focus on Saginaw and Bay City history and other points of interest. And he's going to be talking about Hell's Half Mile and some of the lavish homes here on Center Avenue. So there's some wonderful things. But so let's give a big welcome to Sam.
Oh no. Okay. The lights. How we doing tonight? Good. Welcome. Enjoying the weather? Oh, it's really dark. Okay. Me too. I am just sad that it's going to be 40 on Monday. Like, come on. It's April. It's April, I guess. So, all right. Well, as you heard, my name is Sam Fitzpatrick. I'm education coordinator at the Historical Museum of Bay County. We're just down the road next to City Hall. The presentation I'm doing tonight, I'm calling Hell's Half Mile and Center Avenue, Rags and Riches. These are two very different, tax brackets of people back in the 19th century. You had the red light district, formerly known as Hell's Half Mile, and then just a few blocks east, you had the people with the smooth hands living on and around Center Avenue, and the people with the rough hands were fighting in the streets. Because they worked too, but they also fought, so they had very rough hands and faces, among other body parts. But anywho, Tim, can I get you? Thanks. Should I just make a noise when I want you to flick the? Okay. Yeah, I'll just do something. But anyway, this is the Historical Museum of Bay County. We're at 321 Washington Avenue, right next door to City Hall. We offer walking tours, museum tours, both virtual and in-person education. We have a free monthly second Saturday programming. We have a gift shop, a research library, and much, much more. We have 3 main galleries. The main one is the Trails Through Time, which is a big, broad Bay County history exhibit. Studying everything from the Anishinaabe peoples all the way up through 20th century industries. Upstairs, we have the Chancellor Maritime Gallery, which is all about Bay County shipping and shipbuilding past. So a lot of ship fans in here. You guys will like that. Everything from Wheeler to Davison to Defoe. We have a virtual exhibit with Les Staudiker, including some films of him racing and stories about him crashing his speedboats that he used to build in the Saginaw River here. And then across the hall from that, we have a really exciting exhibit called the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame, which turned a year old last month. This looks at over 120 different musicians, all from Michigan. Everybody from shirtless Iggy Pop to Bob Seger to Madonna to Mark Farner to Stevie Wonder, Ted Nugent, Kid Rock. Actually, now that I think about it, I think Madonna and Bob Seger show up a lot. You have Bob Seger solo, Bob Seger with the Silver Bullet Band. You have young, skinny Bob Seger, and you have modern Bob Seger. I guess I'll call him mature Bob Seger. But anyway, I should probably make some announcements. So real quick, we do have some fun stuff coming up at the museum. We had a show, and actually, thank you, Tim, for helping us with that. At the planetarium, we had Madonna 40, which had a special showing of Smelly Little Town, which is a documentary short by New York-based film producer Zach Neumeier, studying Bay City's a strange relationship with Madonna, or kind of studying what some might call the failure to capitalize on her being born from here. It's an interesting take on Bay City and its people, but we had some showings there at the planetarium, and starting Monday, running for 2 weeks at the museum, we're going to have 2 daily showings of the film. It's going to be inside our Robert and Ann Hatchell Theater, which actually I'm going to plug Delta in again. We just also got 7 or 8 documentaries available for free inside the theater. Produced by Bob Przybylski, and then we're going to be getting some more soon. But anyway, getting back to Madonna. Starting Monday, the 17th, running through the 28th, you can catch Smelly Little Town playing at noon and 3 p.m. And then this Tuesday, because we're open until 7 p.m., we're going to be showing it a third time at 6. Our next second Saturday is going to be On Board the Appledore. It's going to be Saturday the 13th at 1 p.m. We do ask that you RSVP soon. There are 5 seats left out of a total of 42. We're going to be taking the boat out for a river cruise and then sailing on the bay. I'm going to be talking about some of the history along the river and the city as we sail by it. And I believe the pilot's also going to be talking about the ship itself. Our June 2nd Saturday is going to be with Michelle Judd of Bay City Boat Lines. We're going to be on the Princess Winona. That presentation is going to be while it's docked. And then if you guys want to stick around at 1 p.m., the boat will go out. But there is a price for that, but the presentation is free. We have more events coming up than I can name, so I'm just going to say head over to our website, bchsmuseum.org, go to our events calendar, and you'll see numerous things going on. We have everything from summer camps to kids, stuff going on at the Trombley House, museum events, members-only galas where you can drink, snack, and talk history. Our next one's going to be May 11th, I think. May 11th? Yeah. May 11th, and the topic is going to be on tea culture, Bay City's culture, history with tea, looking at the Victorian era, Prohibition era, so, not tea in those teacups. And then the post-war, mid-century, looking at tea. And it's also going to discuss Bay County's Black history because those are our 2 newest exhibits in the hallway. So, but anyway, I'm not going to stall any further. I'm going to get into this, I do promise. So check out our events page. We have a lot of stuff going on there, and we hope to see you there. We're open Monday through Friday, 10 to 4, and there's no charge. We're free. All right. Okay, thank you, Tim. I'm not going to make that noise. It's okay. Okay, so lumbering in the Saginaw Valley, the root of all the salaciousness going on in Bay City in the late 19th century. So lumber in the Saginaw Valley, as we can see here, proved to be an extremely viable resource for the region and ushered in a new era of development, population increase, and of course, prosperity. But for who? This proved to be especially viable in the cities of Bay City and Saginaw. Muskegon over in West Michigan is also a notable example. It brought many people, cultures, and business tycoons here into Michigan and especially in Bay City. This is a picture I took from one of our exhibits in the Trails Through Time gallery. These stats are from 1882, which is said to be peak lumbering in the Saginaw Valley. Lumbering was, without a doubt, one of the biggest industries Michigan had in the 19th century, and the Saginaw Valley was probably the epicenter of all that. In the year 1882 alone, there were 858,344,000 board feet of lumber produced. Shingles, just one byproduct of the lumbering industry, there was 176,376,500, and a ton of other numbers up there that are very long to read, but big numbers. All right, so on the next page, I'm going to read this for you guys, just kind of give you guys a brief summary of the vast lumbering industry in the region and why people came here. This is an excerpt from The Story of Logging the White Pine in the Saginaw Valley by Harold M. Full and Irene M. Hargraves. It reads, the Saginaw River is approximately 20 miles long with tributaries branching out beyond the city of Saginaw with like the roots of a tree, which you can actually see in the previous picture. But all these tributaries totaling 864 miles, I believe the real number is a little closer to 900, poured logs into the Saginaw. The Saginaw River banks were dotted with sawmills during the lumbering era. By 1854, there were 29 mills, and 9 more were being constructed on the river. By the 1870s, there were over 100 mills running full blast night and day, so they had first, second, and third shifts. Sawmills, business partnerships, and companies were constantly being organized, reorganized, or forced out of business. Mills burned down and were rebuilt and refitted. Almost overnight, new sawmills suddenly appeared, and some mills were giant complexes of mill booms, wharves, drying yards with company boarding houses, barracks, and stores, mill hand houses, cooper shops, or barrel cooperages, building barrels, which was actually a very large business in this area. Where'd I go? I lost my... Stores, mill houses, cooper shops, offices, salt blocks, saw and belt repair shops, shingle, and lath mills. One mill built by Wellington R. Burt, who was a very prominent Saginaw lumber baron, and actually had a commuter steamboat named after him that went between Bay City and Saginaw. One of the founding business partners of Saginaw, actually. Anyway, his mill, it was near the current site of Zilwaukee, even had its own schoolhouse and library. Some lumbermen owned whole fleets of schooners, tugs, and steamers, and owned and operated lumber camps and mills in northern Michigan and other Great Lakes states, and in Canada, as well as the Saginaw Valley. 1882 was a peak year for lumber manufactured in the Saginaw, but the mills did not begin to disappear until the 1890s. And there was about, according to Jeremy Killar, who did a really good read, if you're looking for a really good read on some of the fine-tuned details of the Saginaw Valley and its lumbering, and Muskegon, actually. Jeremy Killar's Michigan's Lumber Towns, Saginaw Bay City, Muskegon, examines each city individually. The lumber barons, the type of wood they went after, the culture, the immigrants, the salaciousness, the rowdiness, all that stuff in one book. I highly recommend it. It's a great read. And I think he taught at Delta College, right, Chris? Yes. He did. Did you know him? Yes. Oh, excellent. Is he still in the area? I'd love to meet him. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so getting to my next slide. So these are all pictures that are on display at the museum. They were all taken around Bay County, specifically from the little area of Crump, which is in the northern section of Bay County, which had some of the last Saginaw Valley white pine that was cut down in the region. They were cutting down very old, matured hardwood trees. Some were 300 or 400 years old. To put things into perspective, when you want to talk about the height of some of these trees, look no further than City Hall's clock tower. Some of them were that tall, 185 to 200 feet tall. There's a reason we don't see them too much anymore, and that's because the word conservation did not exist in the vocabulary of lumber barons. They just clear cut. It's also part of the reason the CCC was brought in later, because of the damage the lumbering industry did. And it was a transient workforce. They had to go where the trees were until there weren't, and then they had to move on. A lot of these guys were immigrants, Polish, German, French, and many others, and from the US, Canada, the British Isles. They came from all over to work toil very long days, and they were under very strict rule. They worked for about 4 or 5 months straight. Lumbering was typically done in the winter. It was easier to haul logs over frozen ground or frozen bodies of water until the spring melt, when there was excess floods, and moving logs south to Saginaw Bay City was a little easier by barge or by train. The railroad really sped things up in the lumbering industry here. Oxen or horse and buggy. And the lumbering season lasted between November, December through March, April, whenever that spring thaw came around. And they would work 6 days a week. 10 hours was a short day. They would work 12, even up to 16 hours a day. And there were two things you typically could not find in a lumber camp. If they were in there, they were smuggled, and those were whiskey and women. They came to Bay City to get those. Yes. It's a different time back then. Anyway, the guys in the lower right side of the screen, these are the types of people you would see walking around Hell's Half Mile after they had just gotten paid. After an entire season of lumbering, 6 days a week, they came down to Bay City. They got their paychecks. Their paychecks were anywhere from $75 to $200, which, if you add inflation, is still not worth it, if you ask me, for all that. Really, it's just like, yikes. So that's why I said there was money to be made, but for who? Anyway, this picture is interesting because the flash seems to have startled them. They're eating in the cookie, which is like a dining hall in a lumber camp. They ate anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000, 6,000 calories a day, and they burned it all off. You never saw an overweight lumberjack. They were constantly working in the cold winter under many layers of clothes. There were no power tools. It was just elbow grease, keep moving, don't complain. No OSHA, no HR, just deal with it, man. But anyway, when they were eating food like this, they were actually prohibited from speaking to one another. Does anyone know why that might be? Different languages. Well, that maybe. I didn't think of that, but yeah, you're right. Someone yesterday suggested choking, which is, another viable response, but really it was to keep them from arguing and fighting with each other. So it was kind of like when I was in elementary school, we weren't allowed to talk and eat because we were loud, not because we fought each other, because we were just loud, I guess. But anyway, these guys were told to keep quiet, or you can fight outside, I guess. Next This is Henry Sage's sawmill. And this picture really doesn't do it justice because this is just a picture of the main building. We're not seeing the remainder of the property. This thing was huge. It was considered the largest, if not the largest sawmill in North America at the time. Henry Sage is what we call an absentee lumber baron, which meant he didn't live here. He lived in Ithaca, New York, where his business partner, John McGraw, also was, who's I think I talk about his house later, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, this is the main portion of the sawmill, and they're standing in what would be Liberty Harbor Marina and Veterans Park now. His property was so huge, his docks, his wharves, the train cars that came in, the log booms. It was at the foot of Midland Street, and it stretched from there and what would be through Liberty Marina. There's where the future site of where O's is going to be, all the way up to Vets Bridge. It was a massive, massive operation. And it was just one of many. He had operations in Ontario, in New York, elsewhere in the Great Lakes. Bay City was just one of his many properties, but it was the most prominent in this area for sure. But he was absentee, which kind of caused a rift in Bay City in the late 1800s. There was kind of, according to what I've read in Killar, because of people like Sage, they came here, they helped to create a boom town, but as soon as that resource had dried up, AKA the lumber, they had to pick up and go where the money was, and it left a lot of employees now unemployed and kind of hesitant to look into outside investment out of this happening again. But I'm getting off topic, so. I should talk about that. So this is also this is interesting. So Henry Sage actually built his own company town called the Village of Winona, which was predominantly the Midland Street business district, where lumberjacks could shop, dine, eat, and buy stuff for their families, provisions. In 1877, it joined the villages of Banks and Salzburg and created West Bay City, a totally separate city. And then in 1905, after some lengthy debates, it merged with the Greater Bay City we all live in today. But going way back, the Village of Winona, he was going to call Lake City. Unfortunately, that town name was already taken by a little town in West Michigan, I believe. So he chose Winona, who was based on the fictional character in a Henry Longfellow poem, aka Princess Winona, or the street name Winona, the Winona Hotel. It's all the same Winona. All right, so this is a picture of milled lumber awaiting shipment to outside markets along the banks of the Saginaw River. During the lumber era, both sides of the Saginaw River had literal walls of lumber stacked on each riverbank. They were being awaited to be boarded onto ships or schooners or barges, and those would be taken all over Great Lakes, up all over the Great Lakes to Chicago, up the St. Lawrence Seaway, to even international markets. Saginaw Valley white pine was a very, very well sought after resource. It was very hardy. You could build almost anything out of it, and there was just an almost unlimited, what seemed to be an unlimited supply. The naivete of the day was that we had enough lumber to last hundreds of generations to employ the next hundreds of generations of people. It lasted about 30 years. Oops, time to go to the next, time to go elsewhere. Shipping was also a major player in the lumbering industry for this reason, transporting it elsewhere. And you could also use the lumber to build those ships like James Davison did. Davison was smart. He didn't have things built in a foundry and shipped here. He just used the local lumber supply and the local labor supply. Very intelligent guy. So now we're going to get back in, now that we know the background of the industry, we're going to look at kind of the characters that came down to Bay City to have their own version of Spring Break or Mardi Gras, I guess you could call it, but a much bloodier one. Here it is. This is Hell's Half Mile, and this is Hell's Half Mile's Main Street, aka Water Street. So for reference, we're looking north along Water. That building to the right is the Fraser House, which was considered one of the more prominent hotels in Bay City, if not the most prominent. To the left, all these rows of buildings over here, those burned down, and that's now where we have Winona Park today. And kitty corner from the Winona over here would be kind of where the Doubletree is today. So 6th Street is like right here. And again, those rough and tough guys that couldn't talk while they ate, so they came down here to blow off 4 or 5 months of pent-up aggression and steam. They took their very small paychecks, and they spent them all very liberally within 2 weeks. They bought whiskey, they bought women, they gambled, they bought hotel rooms, they placed bets on guys fighting on each other. Some guys died, there was a lot of stabbing, a lot of fighting, a lot of biting, actually, a lot of venereal disease. Not a lot of gunfighting, however, which I found interesting. A lot of people had guns, and the police didn't have weapons really until the 1880s. Before that, police work was very much a vigilante force, and then Bay City got a more professional force. I should announce one more quick announcement. I'm going to be announcing my Hell's Half Mile walking tours very soon. We have the date set for May, June, and July. I think of the next couple of days here, look for them. I have an updated tour with more information. It's gorier. It's more brutal. It's rough. It's salacious. I also have some added details to current stories I already have, and the route has been redrawn with where I'm taking people. So keep an eye out for that. So, okay, we're now going back in time and entering Hell's Half Mile. So on the next slide, this is interesting. Caption, Saginaw River, circa 1900, so kind of on the tail end of a lumbering industry, but we can still see there's still some hardwood manufacturing going on. By this point, a lot of timber was being shipped in from Ontario to keep the sawmills going, but that only lasted until Ontario said, if you're going to cut down our trees, we're going to mill them. And that was really the final nail in the coffin for the lumbering industry. In the background, we can see the 3rd Street Bridge. We can see plenty of ships on the Saginaw River. It was a very, very, very busy river, being a port city. But interestingly, the note, Tierney Saloon and Tent, right there. This white structure you see here, and Ed Tierney is a name that comes up often on my tour, interestingly. This is a saloon and a tent, so kind of like how the sawmills could pop up and disappear all of a sudden, the saloons and bars did the same. Sometimes they weren't around long enough to even be recorded in the directories. Some of them could be a real flash in the pan. They could sell liquor until they got caught. Is it a bar? Is it a saloon? Or is it just Al in the alleyway selling bar? You know, it was kind of an anything goes kind of thing. It wasn't as, it wasn't like we have it today. So, all right, our first character we're going to talk about is Kit or Kate Lapham, and she kind of went by both names. I'm not sure if that was because she was trying to hide her identity or if the journalists were spelling phonetically at the time. She was caught hanging out outside the Social Saloon. The Social Saloon was one of the many saloons that made up Hell's Half Mile. Today, this is the intersection of Saginaw and 7th, and going west. And the saloon would be about where the parking lot meets the Comfort Inn right there. Nowadays, there's a couple of dumpsters there. Maybe that's symbolic. I don't know. It was a real dive, I guess. It was frequently referenced as being amongst the most notorious, dirty, and rotten in the area. Kit or Kate Lapham was once seen here in broad daylight, smashing out the windows with a club, wearing nothing but her red undergarments. Her actions were passed by a passing policeman. Her face was badly scratched and bruised from a previous fight, and actually she was bleeding. Excuse me. It was also reported that a lot of furniture inside had been badly damaged and turned over. When the policeman came up to her and said, "Lady, what in blazes are you doing? It's broad daylight, you're drunk, you're half naked, talk to me, what's going on?" She said, quote, "If I cannot get satisfaction out of the proprietor, I will out of his property," end quote. Interpret that how you will. Ed swore he was done with her after this, but this was a repeat issue. She was clothed and brought down to the station where she was sentenced to 20 days in jail for public drunkenness. The notorious Kit Lapham is known by locals, and her court cases were watched closely by the residents of both Bay City and West Bay City, as whenever it involved her, the details were often juicy. And she was reported on extensively in the 1890s. All we know about her was that she was a woman, a wild woman in her 20s in the 1890s and lived in Bay City. At times appeared to be homeless, and at times appeared to live in bars owned by this Mr. Ed Tierney, who seemed to have been in some kind of, I guess, a situationship with her. I won't call it a relationship, but they were an item, I guess. I don't know. They weren't official. something like that. It's alluded to in the Bay City Times, but it's, you know, it's why that's a new term, a situationship. You're with someone, but you're not like going steady, if you know what I mean. So anyway, a court case ensued where Ed Tierney was called to the stand, where he denied ever doing such a thing to her, despite her face being slashed and now scarred from the altercation. Ironically, she was bailed out by Ed. She didn't have to serve her full term, which came as no surprise to the locals. It turns out there was a history of drama and these two fighting publicly. This is why reality TV is as popular today as it is. We're humans. We live for the drama. It goes to show people really haven't changed that much. We really do love the gossip and the juicy details. And Ed and Kit, in their situationship, I guess they were that couple. They made their issues public so everybody could hear it. They fought, they broke up, they made up. They fought, they broke up, they made up. We've all seen that happening. This was the 1890s version of that. So they got back together, and there's actually several stories of her robbing people or swindling people or just getting in fights or destroying furniture. She was just a hot mess, I guess. Kit was often arrested for stealing things such as gold watches, money, and jewelry. She was a bit of a kleptomaniac. Once, angered that she had been caught, she cursed, yelled, and screamed so loud the entire police station could hear her. The Bay City Times was sure to report a story on that and said, quote, "The vile talk in which the woman indulged in was something shocking," end quote. But they never said exactly what she said, but, we can only imagine. So this next story, I actually found some new details on. This is also kind of a graphic, weird, quasi-romantic story. This is called the Saginaw and Center Fight. This fight involved two shanty boys named Jack O'Brien and John White, who both hailed from Goderic, Ontario, which, interestingly, is one of our sister cities. White was new in town, and O'Brien had been picking on him. One night, around 5 p.m., in a saloon on Saginaw, just north of Center Avenue. So if my mapping is correct, that's kind of around where Timothy's Cigars is today. Words were exchanged, and a fight broke out. They took the fight outside, where O'Brien pushed White to the ground, and then it took a weird twist. He jumped on top of him, clenched his teeth onto his lower lip, and spit it off clean to the side. Police officer Samuel M. Catlin arrived after hearing the scuffle, who just happened to be patrolling nearby. O'Brien, whose face was now covered in White's blood, got up and spit at Officer Catlin's feet. Before Catlin could do anything, another onlooker by the name of John McFadden jumped at the officer and grabbed him by the arms to halt his arrest. It was reported in the Bay City Times that McFadden had been standing nearby, egging O'Brien on to, quote, "do his worst." Oh yeah, they egg each other on to fight back then. It was rough. Fellow officer Collins thankfully grabbed McFadden, and he released his hold on Catlin, although he was able to get a few more punches to the face in. White, who was in agony over his lip, was sent to a surgeon's office to have his lip reattached. Not sure how the outcome of that was. I don't think he had his smile back, but he was able to keep his lip. It was still fresh. McFadden was given the option of paying a whole $40 for his actions or being sent to the Detroit House of Corrections. He chose the latter, to where O'Brien was sent later. So he couldn't afford $40, so he actually chose going to the Department of Corrections. All right. Now, I know the name of this presentation is Rags and Riches, but this is kind of where those two worlds mesh. So on this next slide, this is the Fraser House again. It was a very popular place to visit, not just for being hotels, but you could also grab a drink, you could eat, you could kind of lounge, smoke a cigar, maybe read a book if you were literate. But Captain James Davison actually got in a fight on Hell's Half Mile. This is kind of where those worlds collide. Usually when we think of Hell's Half Mile, we think of the downtrodden, the scoundrels, the dirty, the hardworking working class came here to fight and blow off steam. James Davison wound up getting into an altercation that he actually didn't want to. So I guess he wasn't instigating the fight this time, but he was a genius businessman and also quite the brawler. So again, this is the Fraser House that was built in the early 1860s and named for James Fraser, who was an early settler and proprietor of Lower Saginaw in what would become downtown Bay City, where downtown Bay City is now. The structure was 4 stories and said to be the premier hotel for visitors to the area, with 75 hotel rooms originally built, with some expansions coming later. Along with parlors and sitting rooms, the hotel also featured billiard rooms, bathrooms, and kitchens. The hotel also featured a stage and curtain for entertainment, which I'm sure was bawdy and salacious as well. The hotel remained in this location for several decades as a prominent East Side hotel until it burned down in 1906. It was replaced by the beautiful Winona Hotel, which almost to the date burned down in 1977. During its heyday, the hotel drew the attention of many influential people and locals and visitors alike. Captain James Davison, owner of the Davison Shipyard in West Bay City, was spotted sitting out front of the Fraser House in 1892 one night enjoying a conversation over a drink, probably discussing business matters. While Davison was in conversation, 2 men named George Handy and Edward Morton approached him. Morton leaned directly into his face, asking him for money so the two could afford to leave town. Davison, who probably did have money in his pockets, told them he didn't have any and just said to kind of go away and shoot him off. This only enraged Morton. He placed both his hands on the arms of the chair that Davison was sitting in and demanded he hand over money. Davison suspected Morton was after his gold watch that was on his wrist and then just shoved him away gently. Morton then tried to swing at him only to be met with a sucker punch in the face from Captain James Davison. Knocking him down, he attempted to grab a stone from the gutter. Probably when they mean gutter, they don't mean a roof gutter. Back in the day, they had sidewalk gutters that I kind of wish we still had. It made all the dirt and the water wash off into the gutter, so you didn't get your shoes dirty. Side story, I was taking a tour through Old Louisville last year, and I was in a neighborhood full of historic homes, not too different from Center Avenue, and they had all these sidewalk gutters, and I thought, that's really neat. I kind of wish we still had that. Those little touches. Anyway, so he attempted to grab the stone in that gutter, but was met with 2 or 3 more blows from Captain James Davison. He really wasn't messing around. Handy was then attempted to jump in, but was stopped by Police Captain Madden, who just happened to be arriving in time. A gentleman by the name Patrolman Lynch also arrived, giving chase to Handy onto Water Street between 4th and 5th. That same day, both men were hauled onto police headquarters and were found to have razors on them and pairs of stolen shoes they attempted to sell for money. Morton also had a pretty black eye from Davison's blows. The pair was eventually arrested and charged with assault and battery and larceny. And that's one of the news stories I found over the winter. So you're the second group to hear that. Nobody on a tour has heard that story yet. So just across this, and real quick, I guess for reference sake. So the guy on the left, that is Captain James Davison. And on the right, that's one of his ships being launched inside the Davison shipyard. You can see all the milled lumber right here to be used to build ships. And launching vestibules was really a spectacle to see. They cheered on. They loved to watch it happen. James Davison built perhaps what are considered to be some of the largest wooden ships on the Great Lakes ever produced, some being in excess of 300 feet long. If you're walking over in Vets Park, you can actually still see this very slip. The city preserved it when they built the park. There's a pedestrian walk bridge over it. You can see people fishing in this area. You can also see a lot of geese walking around. Just be careful. They will attack you. But yeah, cool piece of history that's been saved. So the next stop I'm going to talk about is the former St. James Restaurant / Saloon. This is the approximate location. I actually made a mistake when I took this. This is facing west. I was supposed to be facing east. So where Mill and Lofts Mill and Lofts are now is where the St. James Restaurant was. This restaurant was said to be on the east side of the street, and I refer to this as Bay City's Fight Club. Underneath the restaurant was said to have been a secret sporting room where drunken lumbermen would gather in crowds and place bets on other drunken lumbermen fighting. One of the guys that came down here was Paddy Corrigan, and he had the nickname of Paddy the Pig or Paddy the Dog, and rightly so, because for a certain amount of drinks, I'm sure after many drinks and for the right price, he would get down on all fours and fight dogs and rats using his teeth. It was said he had a very scarred and pockmarked face from doing so, and he was very popular with police. Maybe they were placing bets on him, I'm not sure. I mean, the police aren't necessarily free from crime here as well. But he was often arrested and advised to please leave town when he was let go from jail, because even for Hell's Half Mile, that's just a little too vile. But he rarely, if ever, did. The restaurant's bartender, not the owner, John Matisse, aka Canada Jack, was a bartender here who was a very notorious person in Hell's Half Mile and elsewhere in Michigan. In Pontiac, he was charged with attempted murder and once incited a riot at a circus in Holly in 1881. He also had a proud pastime of making counterfeit money. So a very, very good, upstanding citizen, entrepreneur. He also ran his own bar on 12th Street, which we now know as Columbus, and headed the 12th Street gang in town, which was known for a string of robberies and harboring criminals from the law. So if you were a criminal running from Johnny Law, you could hide out at Canada Jack's bar and get a drink. Not bad. However, Canada Jack did not always get away with everything. Once, after attending a Buffalo Bill show in Saginaw, he went to a local saloon and got very drunk. For some reason, got really ticked off, stood on top of the bar, and threatened to scalp everyone inside. This was enough to alert the police. The police showed up. He was then threatening to whip the whole crowd. Fortunately, he never did either of those things, and he was arrested, hauled off to jail. On his way to jail, it was at night, and the streets were probably gas-lit at this time. He was clubbed in the head by an unknown assailant who just ran away. It's questioned whether this was someone trying to get back at Jack for being a jerk, or if it was someone trying to hit the police and to free him. We'll never know. Eventually, in 1883, the 12th Street Gang was busted, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison and sent down to Jackson, where they had a prison. All right, and the next character is probably the most well-known in Hell's Half Mile in Bay City, and that's Fabian Joe Fournier / possibly Paul Bunyan, and I'll explain. It's kind of a story. He was known as the toughest man in town. Fabian Joe Fournier was a, quote, noisy, quarrelsome fellow, drank considerably, in all respects, a notorious tough Bay City times. He came to Saginaw Valley in his teens from Quebec. He was a Quebecois. He spoke French. He lived in the Banks area, I think, right along Marquette Avenue, if I'm not mistaken. He had a wife and 2 kids, but he was no family man. If he wasn't drinking and fighting on Hell's Half Mile, he was working up north in the timber fields. And at a time when a man's average height was 5 foot tall, Joe stood at a little over 6 foot tall, which made him look like a giant. Remember that. He was outrageously strong and apparently had 2 full rows of teeth. This disorder is referred to as hyperdontia. You can look it up. You can Google it. You've been warned. It's kind of gnarly. Yeah. Ugh. So poor teething Joe Fournier must have just been an awful as a baby. Being double jointed, he was also very agile. He was known for his fast speed at which he could work, move, and especially fight with. He used his massive strength and hands to his advantage, and he fought with what they called French style, using his feet. His skull being massive as well, he was known to use as a battering ram, which almost always caught his opponents off guard when fighting. However, he didn't fight in the lumber camps. He saved that for when he came to Bay City. He would mark his territory by biting off a chunk of a bar stool, a bar, a handrail, literally anything wooden he could sink his teeth into, not animals or dogs or rats like Patty. He wasn't, he wasn't that low of a character, I guess. Whenever he would do this, he was kind of like saying Joe was here. He would say, that Joe Fournier, his mark, or he's mark is the way it was written phonetically, as if saying Joe was here, or come on, try me, I dare you. See, I got 2 full rows of teeth. But and just to show people the indents of the teeth, I guess is what I'm guessing. That's why he did that. But I wouldn't mess with anybody acting like that around me. So, however, despite being a brawler, he was actually a very ethical worker because he was sober in the lumber camps. So good at his job, he worked his way up to being a foreman, which meant he managed many groups of men in the field. You wanted to be with Joe. You wanted to work with Joe. Under his discretion, it was said you almost always filled your daily quota of lumber. So the guys up top really, really enjoyed him for that reason. He was sober when it was like a Jekyll and Hyde situation. When the second that liquor bottle touched his lips, different story. Run. Don't just walk in the opposite direction. Run. He was a loose cannon. He tried to fight anybody and anything. People that weren't even looking at him. He fought bands or the fool that would try to take him up. And he always won. He never knew when to quit. He was just had full of energy. He was in his 20s when he was doing this, by the way. So when we're in our 20s, we think we're invincible. Joe may very well have been, based on the descriptions written about him, but he wasn't. In 1875, things eventually caught up with Joe. He attended a picnic up in the Au Gres area, and he boarded a ship at the Hawkins Dock, which used to sit behind St. Laurent Brothers, just north of where the 3rd Street Bridge would be. And this was a commuter ship that took people up north to attend a popular picnic around Au Gres. At the picnic, they decided to serve alcohol, and Joe, of course, drank, and he was feeling himself there, being very drunk. He got drunk. He fought people, whether they were trying to fight him or not. He even, quote, tore the bandstand to pieces. Even the band, he just destroyed them. On the way back, he was still drunk, and he started biting the ship's railings. We know he's really feeling it at this point. On the way back in Bay City, he disembarked and kind of drunkenly stumbled ashore, and the legend states that he said he was headed to hell, if anyone asked him. But one of the men that accompanied Joe on the ship was called Blinky Robertson, and he hated Joe. He despised Joe. He thought he was a menace to society. He thought the police weren't doing enough, and they probably weren't, let's be honest. Back in this day. Police work was a whole other animal that I do explain on my tour during this time, so look for those tour dates, and I could talk much more about that. Anyway, Blinky found a ship carpenter's mallet, which can be very lethal if used in the wrong way against a human skull, which is exactly what he did with Joe. He followed Joe along 3rd Street until he was close enough before Joe could even turn around to figure out what the heck was going on. He struck a fatal blow above Joe's left ear, cracked his skull open, killing him instantly. He fell to the ground dead, aged 25 or 26 years old, and left his family, left his widow and children in the Banks area. However, Joe's life and death were so well known, his life became a legend, and his death kind of did too. So the lumber forces were very transient. They had to go to where the trees were until they weren't. So men moved around, groups of men moved around. Some guys switched companies, some companies picked up and moved elsewhere. And during downtime in the lumber camps, you really couldn't do much. There wasn't much to do. They worked 6 days a week, and they were probably so exhausted they just fell asleep. So during downtime, either on Sundays, on nights, or when the weather was too poor to harvest lumber, they would gather around campfires and just tell stories, or play music, or maybe dance, and who knows that the stories were the stories they were telling truthful? We'll never know. Things kind of got stretched out, exaggerated. They became tall tales, I guess. How many of you have played the game of telephone? We all could. We're all at a table right now. Anyway, the game of telephone I used to play as a kid, and you sit at a table and you whisper something into someone's ear, banana bread or something, and you keep whispering that around the table, and then the last person to get it, you say banana bread, but the other person heard like telephone pole or something. It just comes out like that. Kind of the same thing happened with Joe and his stories. Joe's fables and stories were probably mixed up with plenty of other tall, strong French-Canadian lumberjacks, because there were a lot of them prowling the Michigan woods. There is a rebellion in Canada referred to as the Pompanoy Rebellion, where the French rebelled against British rule. They were not successful, and some of the men that fought in this rebellion went on to become lumberjacks in the 1830s in Quebec. And then towards the 1850s and 60s, some of those moved to Bay City because lumbering was drying up in those areas, and it eventually progressed its way out to the Pacific Northwest. So Bonyan, which was a common nickname given to a good guy, you're a good fella, you're one of us. Bonyan in English is Good John, and Paul Bonyan is Paul Bunyan, the anglicized pronunciation of it. Joe certainly fits that description. He's a tall, strong, hardworking French-Canadian lumberjack with a bit of a rowdy, rough side he has to work on. But there were a lot of guys that kind of acted like that. And there was also kind of stories to lift people's spirits out in the woods. And they would tell stories of giant, hardworking lumberjacks that were 400, 500, 600 feet tall. They could clear cut entire forests. They were very good, hardworking guys, which Joe was in the timber fields. He was very responsible. He was placed in charge for a reason. He was a good guy, and he could be trusted. Just don't give him liquor, for God's sakes. So years go by, and these stories get twisted and retold to where they're so exaggerated from the truth. We have tall tales. Eventually, somehow, and even the scholars and books I've written kind of debate on how this happened, Paul Bunyan came out of that. So is Joe solely to blame for Paul Bunyan? Probably not, but I believe he helped influence the legendary American story. I like to believe that his rowdy side didn't really continue on in the story because it was made to be more family-friendly. I'm going to shift into Center Avenue, so the riches in Rags and Riches. Then afterwards, I have a series of photos that were sent to me by, what is it? By Carr. We're going to look at pieces of the Ojibwe that the Saginaw River Marine Historical Society now has in their possession. So when I'm done with this, I can pull those computers up for us. So, okay. So this is a map of the Center Avenue Historic District, which we're currently sitting in. As you can see, it's quite massive. This hangs inside the museum's research library in the vertical files room. So if you're ever in the library and you take an immediate right, there's going to be a blue door. You open that up, there'll be a whole bunch of files of individuals, addresses, locations, events, newspaper files. If you look on the left, you'll see this hanging up on the wall. Its boundaries have kind of changed over the years, little by little, but you get the gist looking at this picture. So the Center Avenue Historic District is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and contains close to 950 properties. It is quite massive. The architectural styles of these properties range from Second Empire, Greek Revival, Italianate, Queen Anne, mid-century modern, Art Deco, Richardson Romanesque, and much, 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 much more. Driving east down M25, ooh, it's bright. Driving down Center Avenue or M25 is almost like viewing the architectural fads in America in chronological order. The older homes closer to downtown are more Italianate and Victorian and Gothic. And as you proceed all the way east down Center Avenue, you actually end into some Art Deco or mid-century homes. It's kind of an interesting thing. And people tend to drive 40, 50. I've seen people drive 60 on Center Avenue. I wouldn't recommend it, but yeah, you know how people are. But honestly, viewing some of these homes, they were built before cars, so they were meant to be viewed either from a carriage at a slow trot or a slow walk, a stroll, or just standing and gawking. Some of these homes have some beautiful plaques that the Center Avenue Neighborhood Association has put out there as their own little historic marker, which I think is just really neat. So the next time you're on Center Avenue, I encourage you to kind of check out the homes, gawk at them. I imagine the homeowners are used to that. They have a big historic home on a state highway. I'm sure they're used to people looking and taking pictures. I do it myself. But also be sure that you walk into the neighborhood itself. So north and south of Center Avenue, you have some equally elegant and beautiful homes. All right, and the very next slide is actually our neighbor right across the street. Right over here on Center, and I forget what this cross street is over here. At 1001 Center Avenue, we have the Dr. Virgil A. and Mary Cranage Tupper House. This is a 2.5-story stone and brick Georgian style or Georgian Revival home designed by local architects Clark and Munger. Clark and Munger have designed numerous things in Bay City in Michigan, but are probably most well known for the Bay City Times building at 311 5th Street and the Alpena City Hall in Alpena. Georgian Revival originated in the colonial architecture of the Atlantic seaboard, North America, during the reign of the four Georges of England between 1714 and 1830. In the 1870s, it reemerged, and between 1900 and 1910, it was one of the most popular revival styles of architecture. Thomas and Julia Pitts Cranage had it built in 1906 as a wedding present for their daughter. That's some serious money. For their daughter Mary and son-in-law Virgil Tupper. Thomas Cranage was a very successful Bay City entrepreneur. What? Oh, sorry. Thomas Cranage was a very successful Bay City entrepreneur and owned Pitts and Cranage, manufacturers of lumber and salt. Thomas Cranage, along with a few others, formed the Michigan Sugar Company in 1897, and we've been smelly ever since. Yeah, that's the smell of the economy, though. Virgil Tupper was a surgeon and a general practitioner who was also the founder of Mercy Hospital, one of the first public hospitals built in Bay City. Virgil is remembered as for the groundbreaking surgical practices he brought into town. He was actually a Pennsylvania native and spent most of his childhood in Bay City with his uncle, Dr. Horace Tupper. So he came from a long line of doctors. Inspired by his uncle, he devoted his practice exclusively to surgery and dedicated his life to learning new techniques in Europe. It was noted that he was among the first in Michigan to perform an appendectomy, use a gas anesthesia, and a bone graft. He married in 1901 to Mary Cranage, who was daughter of Thomas. The home's centrally located entrance features a portico and terrace made of red quarry. It is adjoined by the grooved columns around the front door. At the corners of the building, the brick columns are topped by limestone scrolls. The striking feature of the home are the cornice's dentil moldings. The home also features a deck roof and brick pilasters with unique capitals dividing the facade into 3 bays. Sash windows are featured in the home with keystone lintels lining the porch. The home was actually converted to office space in 1964 by a Peter B. Franz, who was among the earliest in Bay City to promote and preserve historic homes in Saginaw and Bay City. So if we go to the next 2 slides, so go over one right there. This is Dr. Virgil Tupper. This is actually the only picture I could find for this presentation of a house owner. This is him performing what I assume is not a real surgical procedure because the patient appears to be alive and aware. In 1900, and Dr. Virgil is the second from left, right there looking down. So he's practicing somewhere. We don't know the location of the photo, we just know the date. So on the next slide, we have the next home, which is 924 Center Avenue, the Charles B. and Georgiana McGraw Curtis House. Charles B. Curtis was born in Danby, New York in 1837. He relocated to Ithaca, New York, where he befriended John McGraw of the Sage and McGraw Mill, arriving at Bay City in 1864. And at the time, again, that was considered to be the largest sawmill in North America. It was situated across the river at the foot of Midland Street, filling a space where Liberty Harbor Marina is now, all the way south to Vetts Bridge. McGraw's niece, Georgiana, married Charles in 1876. McGraw split off from Sage and went independent, with Curtis briefly living in Philadelphia and Rochester, New York, selling lumber and working as a bookkeeper for the company. Returning to Bay City, he then returned to Bay City in 1878 to work as the mill superintendent. This Queen Anne home was completed in 1894 and designed by William H. Miller of Ithaca, New York, the same designer behind some of Cornell University's buildings and Henry Sage's Ithaca home. I have not been there, but I have been told that Henry Sage's legacy is all over Cornell University and is kind of written about in a little more positive light than he tends to be in books published here, as he's remembered as the baron that came, made a bunch of money, and split. Ithaca, New York, will tell you a different story about him. It's kind of interesting. This is what I've been told. Ithaca's on my list of places to go. I've been to New York City plenty of times, but I have not been to upstate New York. It's on my list. Anyway, the construction was supervised by the Detroit firm of Scott & Scott, costing $18,500 in the day, or around a whopping $534,698.79 today, with some wiggle room because inflation's been nuts in the last year. I'm sure you've all noticed. Some features of this style are the home's stucco and half timbering insets. The home has multiple intersecting gables, with the cross gables upper portions projecting over the lower portions. It also has some Tudor revival elements to it, resembling a medieval English structure with wood framing and infill plaster. This home was constructed using Tennessee sandstone, much exemplifying Saginaw Valley lumber wealth. It uses a variety of timber inside, such as oak, white oak, red gum, birch, and pine. The home was considered unorthodox because it was the first on Center Avenue to be a post-Victorian design. Very controversial back in the day. Ooh. When the house was new, the first floor included a kitchen, a breakfast room, and a formal dining room for 20. The library is where Mr. Curtis would enjoy a cigar and drink while discussing business matters. In the parlor, Miss Curtis would entertain her friends and play bridge. Curtis passed away in 1908, and the home remained in the family for 4 generations. Between 1988 and 1996, it became known as the Stonehenge Bed and Breakfast with 31 rooms. It's now back in private ownership. So if we go over one more slide. These are one of the historic markers that are usually placed out in front of the homes, and this one's unique. A lot of the signs are just kind of on posts or on fence. This is actually built right into a boulder on the property facing center, which I just think is really cool. And then on the next slide, this is an undated photo of the Curtis house. I'm guessing it was late 1800s, early 1900s, given the horse and buggy you can see down here. This would be on the side street, so Center Avenue is over here. But you can see that rounded driveway there, some of the porch features, and the carriage house over there. And on the next slide, this is when it was a Stonehenge Inn with 31 rooms. All right, moving along. The next house is really cool. This owner was really extra. This is 1200 McKinley Street, the Herman and Bertha Wendland residence. This is in the Center Avenue Historic District, but it's not on Center. It's on McKinley. It's a really cool house. And my pictures don't really do it justice. I took a lot of what I could, but I really do encourage just going out and exploring. It's how you get the best experience looking at these homes. And they're all right here. They're all easily accessible. Moving to Bay City in 1883, Herman found employment with Bancroft, Thompson & Company selling dry goods downtown. He opened a retail store inside the Crapo building at Center in Washington, which we now know as the Legacy, where my table is. He did that in 1891. And in 1917, he built the 4-story Wendland block to the immediate right of the Crapo building on Washington as H.D. Wendland & Company. There he offered clothing, appliances, furniture, and housewares, amongst more. It was kind of a staple downtown Bay City store. Wendland took an active interest in the business through let me restart. Wendland took an active interest in his business right up through the ripe old age of 96 and was considered to be the most experienced mercantile businessman in Bay City. He was the founder of the Michigan Retailers Association, known as the Retailing Patriarch of Michigan in his day. He lived up to 96, passing away in 1959. His store remained in business until 1964 when it was purchased by Oppenheim's Clothiers. Tragically, the building was destroyed by fire on Christmas Eve of 1979, and the space that used to inhabit the building is now a parking lot. He constructed this 2.5-story home in 1909 for his first wife, Bertha, and his 6 children. It was built in the 4-square style, which usually lacks ornamentation. However, this home contains fluted columns, a curved portico, and a Corinthian capital resembling a colonial revival style. An intriguing feature of this home is the carriage house to the rear of the property, which it's kind of out of frame. It's behind the home here. He was so extra. He had so much money. This is what he did. He built a carriage house that contained a turntable, allowing the car to be turned completely around upon exit. He didn't even have to put his car in reverse. This guy. Okay. He probably had a driver. Other features include a Romeo and Juliet balcony with an attic dormer and a low balustrade around the porch, roof mirrored by a second on the porch deck. The home also contains multiple bay windows and an open upper balcony facing east. And let's see, the balcony is around the corner. If you're on McKinley, you can see a driveway opening right here. If you look directly down there, so just to the right of that blue house, you can see the carriage house where a turntable used to exist. I don't know if it still does. I'd have to ask the owner, but I bet. I bet. Was it this house? No. Okay. Oh. So trying to outdo his neighbor then. Okay. All right. So on the next slide, this is just a clearer picture of it. And then the next slide. Oh, this is the former location of Wendland's department store. So this is Washington Avenue. And this structure to the immediate left, that's the Crapo block. So this is where, actually right there would be where my table would be. I think Full Steam Social Media is also located there. And that building, after it burned down, it's now a parking lot for the condos that are inside the Crapo building. All right, so our next one's interesting. 1315 Center Avenue, the Whitney residence. Charles Whitney's home is unique, being on Center Avenue, being built at a time when most homes were built using lumber money from the 19th century. Whitney, though, however, was not a lumber baron. Whitney was born in Adrian, Michigan in 1850 and arrived in Bay City in 1874 after living in Alpena for a few years. By 1875, he opened a pharmacy downtown. Partnering with William Pomeroy in 1880, they established Pomeroy and Whitney, a bakery on Washington Avenue. So he cooked up drugs and baked goods. He knew his chemistry. Whitney also opened a pharmacy in the Watson Block, which is now a part of Winona Park. That was actually one of those buildings that burned down before the park was there. In 1881, he opened the Fraser House Block where Delta College Planetarium now stands. He was one of the owners later, and I think helped to expand the hotel. It changed ownership a few times. Whitney served as vice president of both the Bay County Abstract Company and Mutual Building and Loan Association. He was also president of the Bay City Businessmen's Association and secretary and treasurer of both the Black Diamond Coal Mining Company and the Valley Land Company, among numerous other job titles between 1900 and 1924. He had his hands in many pots. This 2.5-story Queen Anne home was constructed using a red sandstone foundation in 1887. Features of the home include 4 cross gables emanating from the house, a witch's cap turret, which is probably the most striking feature on that house. This is Center and Lincoln, so it's right across from the main fire station. There's a witch's cap and a turret above the bay window facing Center and Lincoln, and multiple cutaway bay windows and a wrap porch, sometimes referred to as an East Lake, or a style originating from England. It also features a Romeo and Juliet balcony above the main entrance, which is over here to the left. If you see that stairwell, there's the porch, and then right above that is that balcony they're talking about. The windows are vary between etched, stained, and leaded glass. The Whitneys enjoyed the warmer months in Bay City and spent several long winters in Los Angeles with family. Whitney sold the home in 1925 after the death of his wife, Emma. It's kind of speculated to what happened to him after he sold the home, but it's presumed he left town possibly Los Angeles, where he wintered and had lots of family. This home has been featured in the Old House Journal in Architecture in Michigan and is considered to be one of the best examples of Queen Anne architecture in the state. And if we go to the next slide, we just have a clearer picture of it. Yes, it's the same picture, just with a better filter, I guess. This is an undated photo of the Whitney residence, probably early 1900s, given the looks of the sidewalks, the grass, and the street. And the next slide. Oh, this is an interior of the home. It's one of the few interior pictures I found. I am not much of a furniture historian, but that is definitely a chair. And that's a table. That's a rocking chair. Yeah, it looks like something you'd sit in, right? Yes, beautiful plates above the mantle. Nice little statue over here. I can't statue of David, I'm not sure. A gas-lit lamp in the center table with some books and probably an ashtray for a cigar. A library, probably a gas-powered chandelier, I'm guessing. And that's absolutely a rug. Has walls and a roof and doors. A lot of doors, no. Okay. And that was from about 1912, so Edwardian period at that point. The next home is also pretty intriguing. This is 1514 Center Avenue. This is the Turner residence. Built in 1889, Joseph Turner commissioned architect Dillon Prosser Clark, who used to be with Clark and Munger, behind the Phoenix block downtown to design this Queen Anne home. Turner's wife, Eliza, was from the South, and she kind of brought that influence with her when it came to designing the home. This is one of the few stories where I found a woman being behind some of the designs of their husbands' homes. Some of those features included a lower-level kitchen and dining room, allowing for wind to release heat and especially odors, which is kind of smart if you think about it. They have a east-facing porch, which is by design. Like many in the South, offers shade from the western sun in the evenings when it's setting, so you can sit outside and not swelter and sweat. The home has a rusticated sandstone foundation, narrow clapboards finished with miltered corners, extravagant ornamentation, and a ballroom on the third floor. The porch's small Romanesque columns tend to draw the attention upward while looking at it, which accentuates the above cross gable with elaborate floral motifs, containing a semicircular attic window illuminating the ballroom, which I have a picture of in a moment. The west side of the house has a projecting this is what I meant to have a picture of. The west side of the house has a projecting staircase bay containing several stained glass windows. Turner was born in Clinton, Michigan in 1835 and became a prominent Saginaw Valley lumber baron for a quarter of a century. According to Turner's obituary, Joseph worked in the lumber industry for S.H. Webster, went on to form a partnership with W. Filson Towsey to establish Towsey and Turner, followed by the Miller and Lewis firm manufacturing shingles, and their offshoot of the lumbering industry. After a fire destroyed the Miller and Lewis mill in 1892, both he and Lewis moved the Blodgett mill to Bay City from Muskegon and renamed it South End Lumber and Salt Company. After the Panic of 1893, Turner founded Joseph Turner and Company in Midland, Ontario, but kept his residence in Bay City. He also served on the Bay City Bridge Commission. I don't think he would serve on that today, from the sounds of it. Joseph Turner died of a heart attack in Toronto at the King Edward Hotel in October of 1905. His wife continued to reside inside the home until 1909, dying of what the Times called a heart-related issue, possibly a heart attack or a stroke, after a test run in an early model Oldsmobile. Yes. And I think that happened around Columbus and Washington. Yesterday, the group that I was giving this to was actually the Ford Model A group that's in town. So I said, but hey, it wasn't a Ford Model A. So it was just those Oldsmobiles. Stay away from those. Apparently, it was a little too exciting for her. Anyway, on the next slide, this is another interior photo from the 1970s, but even up to the 70s, they kept it pretty antique looking. Definitely a fireplace, among other things. But this is the western face of a Turner house, and those are the stained glass windows I was talking about that from the exterior. And the inside of the house, there's you can see the elaborate staircase and such. And actually, I've written several articles throughout Bay City on a lot of these homes. And the photographer, these pictures are either mine or the Historic Society's, the photographer was allowed to go into the homes. So if you look up my articles on Route-Based City, just search for my name, you can find the interiors of these homes, which are great. I didn't use the pictures because I don't own the pictures, so it gets that way. But those are online if you want to take a look at those. And this is one of the fireplaces inside the home. Just absolute beauty. All right, and the very last, real quick, the gingerbread and stuff and the floral motifs. This is what it was calling about. This is facing Center Avenue, and this is a zoom in of that picture. Just look at that craftsmanship. This is what I mean. You got to just get out of your car, stop, and just look at the homes because they were built before people could travel that fast. So you're driving by 50 miles an hour on Center Avenue, you're just going to see a purple blurb go by you. But back in the day, they were just meant to. They had money and they wanted you to know it, I guess. You just looked at this stuff. Absolute beautiful craftsmanship that you don't see too often these days. And we're blessed in Bay City to have such an expansive historic district where we can still see this. And the next slide. This is also one of the historic markers of the house in the corner. And you can see those pillars that I was mentioning earlier. And next slide. This is a better view of the cross street picture. That's not mine. I got that from Google Street View because when I was out taking pictures, I forgot, so I snapped that real quick. And the next one is the last house, 1400 Center Avenue, the Frederick W. and Bessie Bradley residence. This is a 5,000 square foot home built in 1887 for Frederick W. and Bessie Bradley, but they only lived here for a few years. Would you believe it? They built this huge home and a couple years later said, all right, time to go. In 1891, the home was purchased by another lumberman named Sewell Eddy, who lived here until 1905 before he moved west to San Francisco. Frederick W. Bradley was born in 1860 and completed his schooling in town before going to work for his father, Nathan Bradley, who also happened to be Bay City's first mayor. Frederick was president of Bradley Milling, which manufactured wooden crates and boxes for the Bradley and Sons lumber business owned by his father. Outside of lumber, Frederick served as the director of both First National and Bay County Savings Bank. The home is a fine example of Victorian architecture. The porch is one of the most unique in all of Center Avenue, with its horseshoe arches and turned columns with intricate balustrade and decorated floral medallions. The home also features a variety of balconies, bay windows, and an extravagant octagonal tower. Inside, you can find 23 rooms, including 2 large parlors and a luxurious dining room with both finished in dark and mahogany and oak wood. Oh, yeah. Let's see. And a very interesting part of this property, if you go forward one, there's some clear shots. This is the side profile of the home. You can see how long it is. Those beautiful terraces they have. And that's the old carriage house turned to 4-car garage. I have a picture of that moment, but there's living quarters above it. I love this house. And then if you go to the next slide, pre-World War II iron fence. I know it doesn't seem like much, but from my research, this is one of the few pre-World War II fences not smelted down for the war effort. So a lot of other fences and metals were used to build bullets, guns, trucks, tanks, and Michigan's a big player in the arsenal of democracy. So for this to have survived, I think is kind of unique. So it doesn't seem like much, but the next time you're walking by, that's some old fencing. Let's see. At the rear of the property, you'll see that carriage house I mentioned. And this is it. This is from the 1970s. I forgot to take a picture, but thankfully somebody in the 70s did. And that's one of the 4-car garages being used. I would love to get inside of this carriage house if anyone knows the owner. I just think it's really cool. I just think those are cool. But yes, a garage that's about the size of a house, a standard house, I guess. All right, do we have any more? These are my sources. And then if you go over, one more slide. Do follow us on social media. Go back real quick. Yep, there you go. Yes, that's the end of my presentation, but real quick, I do want to have more people follow us on social media. We're doing a lot of new stuff going on this year. We have new staff, we have new volunteers coming in, new programs. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and most recently, we're on the TikToks with the younger kids. I'm learning how to run it. I'm planning to make more videos and stuff in the future. So we're growing our presence there. We put a lot of our presentations on YouTube. They're also playing in the Robert and Ann Hatchell Theater. So give us a follow, give us a like, check us out what we're doing on social media. We're going to be around much more. That's the end of my presentation. I also do look for my Hell's Half Mile walking tours. Like I said, I have expanded it. I have included more details. I showed you just kind of a glimpse. We have more people that like to bite body parts. We have a snake eater. We had a traveling Wild West museum. We had a whole bunch of stuff going on in Hell's Half Mile I wasn't aware of until this winter. So for those of you that have taken my tours, when I say at the end, this is just the tip of the iceberg, we're getting deeper into that iceberg now. So yeah, not for the faint of heart. It was a really rough, scary time. And again, I do have several articles in Route Bay City written about these homes and others. One of the homes I was actually going to present on that I didn't was the Gadeen home inside Carroll Park, which is that beautiful Art Deco nautical themed house overlooking Carroll Park. Yes, Ed?
Believe it or not, I thought it was Art Deco too, Sam, but it's technically
Art Modern.
Nautical Moderne.
Art Modern, yep. I stand corrected, yep, you're right. Art Modern with a nautical influence and almost an aeronautical influence too, actually. If you guys know the home I'm talking about, some of the windows and handrails are meant to resemble ocean liners and airplanes of the 1930s. So when I was a little kid, I called it the boathouse, and I guess I wasn't too far off. But yeah. So again, the museum's open Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we're completely free. Starting in June, we're going to offer some Saturday hours. I don't know if we have the hours set in stone quite yet, so I'll get back to you on that.